Most people think poverty changes your morals, but sometimes it reveals them. Rain hammered the parking lot of the 24-hour Save More grocery store just outside downtown Chicago, turning the cracked asphalt into pools of silver under the flickering lights. Shopping carts rattled in the wind. A neon open sign buzzed weakly through the storm. Claire Bennett pulled her thin gray hoodie tighter around herself as she stepped out through the automatic doors, exhaustion weighing down every inch of her body. Her shift had ended 40 minutes ago, but her manager still made her mop aisle 7 after another employee called out sick. Her sneakers were soaked through. Her back ached. And in her coat pocket sat exactly $11.32. $11 between her and another disaster. Claire stopped beneath the awning and rubbed her tired eyes. Her phone buzzed again. She already knew who it was before looking. Landlord. Final notice. Her stomach tightened instantly. Tomorrow, Claire. No more extensions. She stared at the message for several seconds while rainwater dripped from the edge of the roof beside her. Behind her, the store doors slid open again. Warm air brushed briefly against her neck before disappearing back into the cold. Claire swallowed hard and looked toward the dark parking lot where her old Honda sat crooked near the far curb. Noah would still be awake. He always pretended to sleep when she worked late, but she knew the truth. 7-year-old boys should not know what overdue rent sounded like through thin apartment walls. Claire exhaled shakily and stepped off the curb into the rain. Halfway across the lot, something caught against the toe of her shoe. A black duffel bag. Heavy. Water beaded across the surface. Claire frowned and bent down slowly, glancing around the empty parking lot. No one. Just rain. Thunder rolled somewhere far above the city skyline. She grabbed the bag and lifted it slightly. Her expression changed immediately. Too heavy for clothes. Too heavy for groceries. Her heartbeat slowed, then quickened. Claire pulled the zipper open just enough to peek inside. And froze. Bundles of cash. Thick stacks wrapped. In white bank bands. Hundreds. Dozens of them. Her breath caught in her throat. Oh my God, she whispered. She looked around again, pulse hammering now. Nobody. No footsteps. No voices. Just the storm. Her hands trembled as she stared into the bag again. $50,000. Maybe more. Claire's mind exploded with numbers instantly. Rent. Noah's inhaler refill. Heat bill. Groceries. New tires before winter. She could finally breathe again. For the first time in months, maybe years. Her fingers tightened around the zipper. One decision. That was all it would take. Nobody would know. The rain soaked through her hair as she stood there motionless beside the shopping carts. Then her phone buzzed again. This time it was a picture message from Noah. A badly drawn dinosaur holding a sign that read, "Love you M.O.M." Claire shut her eyes. Her face crumpled for half a second before she inhaled sharply and zipped the bag closed. No, she whispered to herself. No, not like this. High above the parking lot, inside a black Escalade parked beside the loading dock, Ethan Calloway lowered the tinted window slightly and watched the woman through the rain-streaked glass. He had been searching for that bag for almost 20 minutes after one of his associates accidentally left it behind during a late-night cash transfer. But now, he wasn't thinking about the money anymore. Because instead of running, instead of hiding the bag, the exhausted single mother in the soaked hoodie turned around and walked straight back toward the store. And for reasons Ethan could not explain, he suddenly found himself unable to look away. Claire pushed through the sliding glass doors with rainwater dripping from her sleeves, the black duffel bag clutched tightly against her chest. The late-night cashier looked up in confusion as she hurried toward the customer service counter. I found this outside, Claire said softly, trying to steady her breathing. I think somebody lost it. The teenage employee blinked the moment the zipper opened. His eyes widened instantly. Holy! He stopped himself and looked around nervously before grabbing the phone beneath the counter. Within seconds, the overnight manager appeared from the back office wearing a wrinkled blue tie and an expression that changed the moment he saw the cash. Claire stepped back awkwardly while they counted stack after stack beneath the fluorescent lights. $50,000 exactly. The manager looked at her carefully. You did not take anything? Claire almost laughed at the question, but the exhaustion in her body swallowed the sound before it escaped. No, she answered quietly. It is not mine. Upstairs, Ethan remained motionless inside the Escalade, one hand resting against the steering wheel while rain slid down the windshield in uneven rivers. His attorney had already called twice, his assistant 3 times. But Ethan ignored every notification lighting up his dashboard screen. His attention stayed fixed on the woman inside the grocery store. She should have kept it. That was the part he could not understand. In his world, people stole millions while smiling across conference tables. Executives lied. Investors manipulated. Even family betrayed each other when enough money entered the room. Ethan had spent years learning one simple truth about people. Everyone had a price. But apparently, Claire Bennett did not. 10 minutes later, she finally stepped back outside into the storm empty-handed. No reward. No applause. No dramatic thank you. Just cold rain and another long drive home in a car that sounded like it might die before morning. Ethan watched her pause beside the curb and look up at the sky for a second, as if silently asking life for one small break. Then she climbed into the old Honda and disappeared out of the parking lot. Ethan stared after the fading taillights. "Who are you?" he murmured under his breath. The next morning, Claire woke before sunrise to the sound of coughing from the other side of the apartment. Her eyes opened instantly. Noah sat curled beneath a faded dinosaur blanket on the couch, his small shoulders trembling slightly as he tried to catch his breath. Claire hurried across the tiny apartment and knelt beside him. "Easy, baby," she whispered gently, brushing messy blonde hair from his forehead. "Slow breaths for mommy." Noah nodded weakly. While she reached for the inhaler sitting on the coffee table, she pressed it into his hands carefully. Relief softened his face after several seconds. Claire finally exhaled too. "Sorry," Noah whispered hoarsely. "Did I wake you up?" Claire smiled despite the knot tightening in her chest. "You are never allowed to apologize for breathing." Noah smiled faintly at that. Then his eyes drifted toward the kitchen counter where unpaid bills sat beneath a flickering light bulb. Children noticed everything, even when adults prayed they would not. Claire stood and quietly opened the refrigerator. Half a gallon of milk, 2 eggs, 1 pack of lunch meat. She closed it again before Noah could see her expression change. Her phone buzzed once more. Another message from the landlord. Final day. Claire closed her eyes briefly and rested her forehead against the refrigerator door. Across the city, Ethan sat inside the glass conference room of Callaway Capital while executives argued over numbers projected across massive digital screens. Billion-dollar acquisitions, international shipping contracts, market forecasts. But Ethan barely heard any of it, because sitting on the polished black table in front of him was a folded piece of damp paper recovered from inside the duffel bag. He had read the note at least 20 times since midnight. In neat handwriting, it said only 6 words. Someone out there probably needs this more. Ethan stared at the sentence again while the room buzzed around him. Then slowly, for the first time in years, something unfamiliar settled deep inside his chest. Shame. The following evening, snow flurries drifted lazily through downtown Chicago as Claire stood behind register 4 scanning canned soup and frozen dinners beneath the dull glow of fluorescent lights. Her body moved automatically now. Beep. Bag. Smile. Repeat. Hours blurred together that way. The store radio hummed softly with old country music while customers shuffled through aisles wearing heavy winter coats and tired expressions. Claire glanced at the clock above the cigarette counter. 7:43. Noah would be finishing his homework with Mrs. Ramirez downstairs. Guilt pressed quietly against her chest the way it always did during double shifts. A little bell above the entrance chimed suddenly. Claire looked up instinctively and froze for half a second. Ethan Callaway stepped inside wearing a dark wool coat dusted with snow, his hands buried casually in his pockets. No expensive suit tonight. No bodyguards. No polished billionaire image from magazine covers. Just a tall man with tired blue eyes scanning the aisles like he was looking for something he could not name. Claire immediately looked back down at her register. She recognized him the moment she saw him. Everybody in Chicago knew Ethan Callaway, founder of Callaway Capital, billionaire investor. The kind of man who appeared on giant screens in airports talking about markets and innovation while ordinary people rushed past carrying coffee. Her stomach tightened slightly. Why would someone like him even shop here? Ethan grabbed a shopping basket and wandered slowly through the store, though he barely looked at anything on the shelves. Truthfully, he had no idea what he was doing there. He only knew that after 2 sleepless nights, He could not stop thinking about the exhausted woman who returned $50,000 without hesitation. It bothered him in ways he could not explain. Claire scanned another customer's groceries while secretly watching Ethan from the corner of her eye. He moved differently than everyone else. Calm, controlled, like the world naturally made space for him wherever he walked. Eventually, he stepped into her checkout line carrying only a loaf of bread, black coffee, and cold medicine. Claire swallowed nervously and forced a polite smile. "Did you find everything okay tonight?" Ethan looked up at her voice. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Up close, Claire looked even more exhausted than he remembered. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes. Her blonde hair was tied back carelessly. Her hands looked dry from constant cleaning chemicals. But somehow she still smiled at customers like she had something left to give. "Yeah," Ethan answered quietly. "I think so." Claire scanned the items quickly. "That will be $14.60. Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly, then paused. His expression shifted. He checked another pocket, then another. "I think I left my wallet in the car," he said with an awkward laugh. "Sorry." The customer behind him sighed impatiently. Claire glanced toward the line forming near the candy racks, then back at Ethan. Without thinking much about it, she opened her own tip jar beside the register and pulled out a $20 bill. "You can pay me back next time," she said softly. Ethan stared at her. "You do not even know me." Claire gave a tired little shrug while handing him the receipt. "I think I do." Something inside Ethan tightened unexpectedly at those words. He accepted the money slowly, their fingers brushing for half a second. Claire immediately pulled her hand back and continued bagging the bread. Ethan should have walked away then. Instead, he heard himself asking, "You trust everybody this easily?" Claire smiled faintly without looking up. "No," she answered. "Just people who look sad." Ethan stood there speechless while the store lights reflected softly in her tired green eyes. For the first time in years, somebody had looked directly at him and seen something beyond the money, beyond the headlines, beyond the billion-dollar empire. And somehow, that terrified him a little. After that night, Ethan started finding reasons to return to Save More almost every evening. Sometimes he bought coffee he never drank. Sometimes he wandered the aisles carrying random groceries he did not need just to spend 5 more minutes near Register 4. Claire noticed it by the third visit. "You really like this place for a billionaire," she teased softly one snowy evening while scanning a frozen pizza and a bottle of orange juice. Ethan looked up from his wallet with the faintest smile. "Maybe I like the cashier." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Claire blinked in surprise, and for one awkward second Ethan almost regretted saying it. But then she laughed quietly, warm and tired and real. "Careful," she said while handing him the receipt. "That line probably works better when people do not recognize you from Forbes magazine." Ethan chuckled under his breath. It felt strange. Natural. He could not remember the last time talking to someone felt easy instead of calculated. Outside, snow drifted gently across the parking lot while Claire locked her register for break. She rubbed her stiff hands together and headed toward the tiny employee smoking area near the loading dock, even though she did not smoke. Mostly she just needed 5 minutes where nobody asked her for anything. Ethan spotted her through the front windows and hesitated briefly before stepping outside too. Claire looked surprised when she saw him approaching through the falling snow. "Do billionaires normally take breaks behind grocery stores?" she asked. Ethan leaned casually against the brick wall beside her. "Only the deeply unhappy ones." Claire smiled faintly at that before pulling her hoodie tighter around herself. The wind bit sharply through the alley. Ethan noticed immediately. Without thinking, he shrugged off his dark wool coat and held it toward her. Claire stared at him. "Absolutely not." "Claire, you are standing in the snow wearing a dress shirt." Ethan lifted one shoulder. "I will survive." She hesitated before finally taking the coat. It smelled faintly like cedar and expensive cologne, warm from his body heat. Claire wrapped it around herself carefully, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Snowflakes drifted silently between them beneath the yellow security light. "So why are you really here?" Claire asked quietly after a while. Ethan looked out toward the empty parking lot. "You ever meet someone who makes you question everything you thought you knew?" Claire laughed softly under her breath. "That sounds way too deep for a grocery store parking lot conversation." Ethan glanced at her then. "I am serious." Claire studied his face more carefully this time. Beneath the wealth and confidence and polished appearance, there was exhaustion there. Loneliness too. The kind that sat deep behind somebody's eyes for years. Suddenly she understood what she meant earlier. He really did look sad. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed sharply inside her pocket. Claire checked the screen, and her expression changed instantly. Fear. What is wrong? Ethan asked quietly. Claire swallowed hard while reading the message from Mrs. Ramirez downstairs. Noah is coughing again. I think he has a fever. Claire's face lost all color. She shoved the phone back into her pocket and started toward the parking lot immediately. Ethan followed without hesitation. Claire. She turned, visibly panicked now. I have to get home. I will drive you. No, it is okay. Claire. His voice softened. It is snowing hard. Let me help. For a second, she almost refused again out of pure pride. But then another cold gust tore through the alley, and all she could picture was Noah alone in that tiny apartment struggling to breathe. Claire looked down at the coat wrapped around her shoulders before finally whispering, Okay. Ethan opened the passenger door of the Escalade for her while snow swirled around them in thick, white waves. And neither of them noticed that for the first time since they met, Claire no longer looked afraid of him. The drive across Chicago felt strangely quiet except for the soft hiss of tires moving through slush-covered streets. Snow blurred against the windshield while warm air filled the inside of the Escalade. Claire sat stiffly in the passenger seat, clutching Ethan's coat tightly around herself, her knee bouncing anxiously the entire way. Every red light felt too long. Every minute away from Noah twisted tighter inside her chest. Ethan glanced at her several times, but stayed silent. He had spent most of his life around people who filled every quiet moment with noise. Claire was different. Her silence felt honest. Fragile. Human. He gets these attacks a lot? Ethan finally asked gently as they turned into a narrow apartment complex lined with rusted balconies and flickering porch lights. Claire stared out the window. Usually when the weather changes fast. She swallowed. Or when he gets stressed. Ethan nodded slowly, though something about that answer lingered heavily in his mind. Stress should not live inside a 7-year-old child. The Escalade pulled beside the curb outside her building. Claire immediately reached for the door handle. Thank you for the ride, she said quickly. Claire. She paused. Ethan hesitated only briefly before holding out the car keys. Take the coat upstairs. Bring it back another time. Claire looked down at the expensive wool coat wrapped around her shoulders. I cannot keep borrowing Billionaire clothing. A faint smile tugged at Ethan's mouth. Then think of it as emergency winter equipment. For the first time all night, Claire laughed softly again. The sound disappeared almost immediately when another coughing fit echoed faintly from an upstairs window. She hurried out into the snow without another word. Ethan watched her disappear through the apartment entrance beneath the flickering hallway light. He should have driven away then. He knew that. Instead, he sat there with both hands resting against the steering wheel staring up at the building while snow collected silently across the hood of the SUV. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, before logic could stop him, Ethan stepped out into the cold and crossed the parking lot carrying a white pharmacy bag from the emergency 24-hour drugstore around the corner. Inside were children's fever medicine, soup, cough drops, juice boxes, and a brand new inhaler. Claire opened the apartment door cautiously after the second knock. Her eyes widened in surprise the moment she saw him standing there holding grocery bags beneath the dim hallway light. Ethan. He lifted the bag awkwardly. The pharmacy was still open. Claire immediately shook her head. You really do not have to keep saving us. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Us. Something softened visibly in Ethan's expression at that single word. Before either of them could say anything else, a small voice drifted from inside the apartment. Mom. Claire stepped aside instantly. Come in before you freeze to death. Ethan entered slowly. The apartment was tiny. Warm in some places, freezing in others. The kitchen light flickered weakly above a sink full of dishes. Children's drawings covered one wall with crooked tape. A tiny Christmas tree sat near the window, even though December had already passed. Ethan stared quietly at the drawings for a second. Dinosaurs. Rockets. Smiling stick figures. Holding hands. Home. Noah sat curled beneath a blanket on the couch wearing dinosaur pajamas and clutching a stuffed bear with one missing eye. His cheeks were pink from fever, but the moment he saw Ethan his eyes narrowed suspiciously. You are rich, Noah announced immediately. Claire closed her eyes in embarrassment. Noah. Ethan surprised himself by laughing quietly. That obvious? Noah pointed toward the window. Only rich people have cars that big. Ethan crouched slightly beside the couch. Fair point. Noah studied him carefully for another second before noticing the pharmacy bag. Is that grape medicine? Ethan looked down. Yeah. Noah sat up a little straighter instantly. Mom always buys the gross cherry one because it is cheaper. Claire looked absolutely horrified. Ethan bit back a smile while handing the bag over carefully. Noah peeked inside and gasped like it was Christmas morning. Juice boxes, soup cups, crackers, tiny ordinary things. But Ethan noticed the way Claire looked away quickly toward the kitchen sink, as if she suddenly could not let him see her eyes anymore. And standing inside that cramped little apartment, filled with exhaustion and love and quiet struggle, Ethan realized something terrifying. For the first time in years, he did not want to leave. Claire stood frozen for a moment in her tiny kitchen while the sound of Noah softly coughing filled the apartment like a fragile alarm. Ethan was still there, standing awkwardly near the doorway with the pharmacy bag in his hand, as if he had just walked into a world he did not fully understand. The flickering ceiling light cast uneven shadows across the worn countertops and the half-empty refrigerator that hummed too loudly in the silence. Noah, still wrapped in his blanket, looked up at Ethan with tired but curious eyes. "Are you staying for dinner?" he asked suddenly, as if it was the most normal question in the world. Claire turned immediately. "Noah, he is just helping us. He is not staying." Ethan glanced between them, surprised by the question, then slowly set the bag down on the small kitchen table. "I do not mind staying for a little while," he said quietly. Claire hesitated. That answer should have made her uncomfortable. It should have made her say no again. But something about the way Ethan stood there, not like a billionaire, but like a man unsure where he belonged, stopped her. She finally exhaled. "I do not have much to offer," she admitted softly, opening the nearly empty pantry. Ethan looked at her carefully. "You already gave me more than you think," he replied. The words lingered in the small room. Claire turned away quickly to avoid his gaze, focusing instead on boiling water for soup. Noah slowly scooted closer to Ethan on the couch, studying him like a puzzle. "Do you really have a lot of money?" he asked bluntly. Claire almost dropped the spoon. "Noah." Ethan crouched slightly, so he was at eye level with the boy. "Yes," he said honestly. "I do." Noah nodded like he was processing an important fact. "Then why are you here?" The question hung in the air longer than expected. Ethan glanced toward Claire before answering. "Because your mom did something most people would not do." Claire froze slightly at the stove, listening without turning around. Noah tilted his head. "What did she do?" Ethan thought about it carefully. "She proved that people can still be good even when life is hard." Claire quietly turned off the stove, her hands tightening around the handle of the pot. No one had ever said something like that about her life before. Not like it mattered. Not like it was enough. Dinner was simple. Soup, bread, and juice boxes Ethan had brought. Noah insisted on sitting between them like a referee deciding a fragile truce. For the first time in a long time, the apartment did not feel completely empty. It felt shared. After dinner, Noah eventually fell asleep on the couch mid-story, his small hand still clutching his stuffed bear. Claire carefully pulled a blanket over him and stood quietly for a moment watching his steady breathing. Ethan stood beside her in silence. "He is strong," he said softly. Claire nodded. "He has to be." The words carried more weight than either of them said aloud. Outside, snow continued falling over Chicago, muffling the city into something almost peaceful. Ethan looked around the apartment again, taking in every detail. The cracked window seal, the old heater clicking unevenly, the stack of unpaid envelopes tucked beneath a book on the table. "You should not be living like this," he said quietly without thinking. Claire turned sharply. "I am not asking for anything from you, Ethan." The use of his name made him pause. He looked at her carefully. "I know," he said after a moment. "That is what makes it worse." Silence filled the space between them again. Claire looked down at Noah sleeping. "I am doing the best I can," she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "I believe you." And for some reason, those 3 words felt heavier than anything else he had ever said. As Ethan finally stepped toward the door, he stopped briefly and looked back at the small apartment one more time. Not at the poverty, not at the struggle, but at the quiet strength holding it all together. And in that moment, he understood something he had never learned in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. Some things in life were not broken to be fixed. They were sacred enough to be protected. The next morning in Chicago arrived with a heavy gray sky pressing down on the city like a weight that refused to lift. Inside Ethan Calloway's penthouse office, the silence felt different from the silence in Claire's apartment. This silence was expensive, controlled, measured. But for Ethan, it was also unbearable. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the frozen skyline, coffee untouched in his hand, while his assistant spoke behind him. "You have 3 board meetings today, 2 acquisition calls, and the Westbridge Charity Gala tonight," she said carefully. Ethan did not turn around. "Cancel them," he replied immediately. A pause followed. That was not a normal response from him. "All of them?" she asked. Ethan finally looked over his shoulder. All of them. Down in Claire's world, morning was already a fight. She rushed through the small apartment trying to get Noah ready for school, while simultaneously checking the heater that had stopped working again during the night. Noah sat on the couch drawing quietly with a crayon, pretending not to notice how stressed she was. "Mom," he said softly, "are we okay?" Claire froze for a fraction of a second, then forced a smile. "We are always okay," she said, brushing his hair back. But her eyes betrayed her. The rent notice was still on the table. The medicine bill was still unpaid. And her shift at the grocery store started in 40 minutes. Across the city, Ethan was already moving. Not toward meetings. Not toward business. Toward something else entirely. He arrived at Save More Grocery just after opening hours. The same store. The same aisles. But today, he was not there as a customer. He walked directly to the manager's office and placed a simple folder on the desk. Inside was a proposal. A full renovation plan for the store. New equipment. Higher wages. Childcare support for employees. The manager blinked in disbelief. "This is a lot of money," he said carefully. Ethan nodded once. "I am aware." "Why this store?" Ethan paused for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because of one person who works here." That afternoon, Claire noticed something unusual. Ethan was inside the store again. But this time, he was not wandering. He was watching. Quietly. Carefully. From the end of aisle 3, Claire finally approached him during her break. "You are going to get me fired if you keep doing that," she said, half joking, half serious. Ethan turned to her. "I am not here to cause problems." "Then why are you here?" she asked. Ethan looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Because I cannot stop thinking about what your life looks like when you are not smiling for customers." Claire's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "You do not need to fix my life." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I am not trying to fix it." A pause. "I am trying to understand it." That night, everything changed. Claire received a call from her landlord while she was closing the register. The rent had to be paid immediately, or she would lose the apartment within 48 hours. Her hands shook as she ended the call. Ethan saw it from across the store without needing to hear the conversation. When Claire stepped outside into the cold parking lot, she found him waiting by her car. "Get in," he said gently. "I cannot keep doing this," she replied, exhausted. Ethan looked at her seriously. "Then let me do it once." Claire hesitated. The wind pressed against her coat. The world felt too heavy again. Finally, she got into the car. As they drove through the city streets, neither of them spoke for several minutes. Then Ethan said something quietly that made her turn toward him. "You are not invisible, Claire." She stared at him, unsure what to say. And for the first time since she had met him, she realized something unsettling. Ethan Calloway was not just observing her life anymore. He was stepping into it. The gala was supposed to be just another quiet corporate evening in Chicago, held inside the glass tower overlooking the frozen river where city lights shimmered like scattered diamonds. Claire had never been to a place like this before. She stood near the entrance wearing a simple black dress Ethan had quietly arranged for her earlier that day, though she had protested the entire time. "I do not belong here," she had said in the car. Ethan had only replied, "You already belong more than most people inside that room." Now she stood frozen at the edge of the ballroom, watching chandeliers spill warm gold light across polished marble floors. Men in tailored suits spoke in low, confident voices. Women moved like they had been trained for this world since birth. Claire instinctively pulled her shoulders inward, suddenly aware of every detail of her own existence that did not match the room. Ethan appeared beside her without warning, as if he had been watching her the entire time. "Stay close to me tonight," he said softly. Claire looked up at him. "Why am I here, Ethan?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering honestly. Because I want them to see you the way I see you. Before she could respond, the announcer's voice echoed across the hall, calling guests toward the center stage for the charity presentation. Ethan's expression shifted immediately, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. I will be right back, he said. Claire watched him disappear into the crowd, swallowed by people who greeted him with handshakes and forced smiles. She stood alone near the edge of the room, gripping the fabric of her dress tightly, feeling more invisible than ever. Then the lights dimmed slightly. The announcer stepped forward. Tonight, we are honored to welcome the founder of Callaway Capital, Mr. Ethan Callaway. Claire's breath caught. She slowly turned toward the stage just as Ethan stepped into the spotlight. But something felt different. He was not speaking like the man she knew from grocery store aisles or quiet car rides. This version of him was controlled, polished, untouchable. And then it happened. And tonight, the announcer continued, we would also like to recognize the inspiration behind his newest foundation initiative. Claire frowned slightly, confused. Ethan turned his head slowly toward her. For the first time that night, she realized the entire room had followed his gaze. Every single person in the ballroom was looking at her. Claire Bennett, the announcer said. A single mother whose integrity and compassion inspired a $50 million community outreach program dedicated to supporting struggling families across Chicago. The room went completely silent. Claire felt her body go still. $50 million. She looked back at Ethan, her expression shaking with disbelief. He stepped down from the stage and walked toward her, ignoring every executive trying to stop him. You did not ask for any of this, he said quietly as he reached her. But you changed how I see everything. Claire shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. Ethan, I did not do anything special. Ethan's voice lowered. You returned $50,000 when you needed it more than anyone else in that store. A pause. That is not normal, Claire. That is extraordinary. Tears filled her eyes despite her trying to hold them back. You built all of this because of me? Ethan nodded once. I built it because of what you represent. The crowd around them remained silent, watching every second unfold. Claire looked down, struggling to process it all. I do not understand, she whispered. Ethan stepped closer, his voice softer now. Then let me make it simple. He paused, then continued. You made me believe that people like me were wrong about people like you. Claire finally looked up at him. The noise of the room faded completely. What does that mean? She asked quietly. Ethan exhaled slowly. It means I cannot stop thinking about you, Claire. Not as an employee, not as a stranger, as someone I do not want to lose. The silence that followed was heavier than anything she had ever felt. And in that moment, standing beneath the golden lights of a world she never thought she would enter, Claire realized that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The silence in the ballroom felt heavier after Ethan's words than any applause or music ever could. Claire stood still beneath the golden lights, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process what was happening around her. The faces of strangers blurred into one another, all watching her as if she had suddenly become part of a world she never asked to enter. Ethan remained close, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his presence beside her. For the first time, Claire did not feel like she was standing alone. I do not know what to say, she whispered. Ethan looked at her gently. Then do not say anything yet. A quiet breath passed between them as the announcer stepped back, leaving the room suspended in uncertainty. The charity presentation faded into the background, forgotten. Nothing mattered in that moment except the space between them. Claire finally looked down at her hands. I am just a single mother who tried to do the right thing, she said softly. I am not a symbol. I am not a story. Ethan shook his head slowly. That is exactly why you matter. Claire's eyes lifted toward him again, her emotions wavering between disbelief and something deeper she was afraid to name. Ethan reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. The same note she had written the night she returned the money. He unfolded it carefully and showed it to her. I kept this, he said quietly, because it reminded me that the world is not what I thought it was. Claire stared at the note, tears gathering in her eyes. You really built all of this because of me? Ethan nodded once. I built it because you made me remember what integrity looks like when no one is watching. A long silence followed. Then Claire finally spoke again, her voice fragile but honest. I do not want to be someone you admire from a distance. Ethan stepped closer, his expression steady. I do not admire you from a distance anymore. The room faded behind them as the crowd slowly began to understand that something far more personal was unfolding than any announcement on stage. Claire's breathing slowed as she searched his face. What are you asking me? She asked softly. Ethan did not hesitate. I am asking you to stop walking away from the places you belong. Her heart tightened. And where do I belong? Ethan's answer came without doubt. With someone who sees you completely and still chooses you every day. For a moment, Claire could not speak. The weight of everything she had survived, every night she had gone to sleep wondering if she was enough, pressed against her chest all at once. Ethan slowly reached out, not forcing, only offering. Claire looked at his hand for a long time before finally placing hers in it. The connection was simple, but it carried more meaning than anything spoken that night. The crowd around them softened into silence as Ethan gently lowered to one knee, not for spectacle, but for certainty. He held her gaze. Claire Bennett, he said quietly, I do not want a moment with you. I want a life with you. A small ring box appeared in his hand, but it was not the ring that mattered. It was the way he looked at her like she was already home. Claire's eyes filled completely now, no longer holding anything back. Around them, the world of wealth, status, and distance faded into something irrelevant. And in that quiet space between who she had been and who she was becoming, Claire finally whispered the only answer that mattered. Yes,